Welcome, all those who are joining us on today, this Bible class. I say hallelujah in the name of Jesus. We are glad that you are able to join us on today. And grace and mercy being extended to each and every one of you. And say peace and shalom to all of your houses, all of those who are listening on today. We're certainly glad that He has given us this day that we can work out our soul salvation with fear and trembling, knowing that the time is upon us and we're in that day where knowledge must increase. If we're still saying and learning some of the things that we learned in the 70s, then knowledge has not increased. If we are still learning some of the things that were taught us in the 90s, then knowledge has not increased. If we're still learning some things that we learned in, they called it what, Y2K, year 2000, and if we haven't grown from then, from that hour, then knowledge has not increased. And so to be in harmony with His Word and His Spirit of revelation, spirit of understanding, He tells us that we are to have His Spirit in Isaiah 11 and verse 2, and it's the Spirit of the Most High. Spirit of the Most High Yah, Spirit of wisdom, Spirit of knowledge, Spirit of understanding, Spirit of counsel, Spirit of might, and Spirit of the fear of Yah, which is to depart from evil. Those who depart from evil, those who hate wickedness, that's the fear. That's having the fear of Yah. And so we want to grow in that. And every day, every year that He gives us, it is time for growth. And we are out of, we've gone through 3 feasts already. Whether you acknowledge them or not, they're already written in heaven. So, some might say, well, I don't keep up with the feasts. I don't think they're important. They're anything. Well, they're written in heaven. So you can judge whether you want to keep up with them or not. A lot of people talking about heaven want to go to heaven, but the things that are written in heaven they don't agree with. He said, "My word is forever settled in heaven." And can't nobody go up there and change His word. And it's already been written, and it's written up in heaven. And so we went through Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. And then the next feast that we're going to have is Shavuot or Pentecost. And it says that in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you count 7 Sabbaths from the Sabbath in unleavened bread. So you go back now, Passover fell on a Sabbath. This particular year does not always fall on the Sabbath, but this particular year did. So you go back to, or you go to the next Sabbath, and then from there you count 7 Sabbaths. So that should take us up to May 23rd. I believe that's when it is. May 23rd or somewhere is the Feast of Shavuot or the Feast of Pentecost. And that's the next feast that we're going to celebrate in accordance with what's already written and written in heaven. It's a joyous time. It's a time of the birth of the church. The birth of the church is when the day of Pentecost was fully come. And it's something that we should recognize every year, like the other ones. I mean, it's a glorious time, and we'll speak more on that as we get closer to that. Kind of keep us in remembrance and the planning as we plan our lives as we go forward. But today, in this Bible class, I want to start off in Isaiah Isaiah chapter number 53 and verse number 1 is where I want to start off. And that says, "Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of Yah revealed?" And as we go through this class, this is a teachment that some of it might be hastened just a bit, but it's going to come down to how is it being revealed. He says, "To whom is his arm revealed?" Some people get revelation, other people don't. Everybody does not have revelation. I'm sad to report to you, but everybody does not have revelation. If the people of this book is not revealed to you, then you're not going to see his arm in its entirety. Now you might see salvation. You could see salvation. What does it take to be born again? Which it's not a dark mystery. There's nothing dark about it. How to be born again. Jesus gave it plainly to Nicodemus when Nicodemus came to him at night. It's very simple. You have to be born again in order to see the kingdom, born of water and spirit in order to enter in. Not difficult, not mysterious. The new birth is something that was spoken of even in the Old Testament, and so, but everybody doesn't see his full arm. This whole thing as it unfolds, and some of it unfolding right before us, because everybody doesn't believe the report. And so if you don't believe the report, then his arm of revelation, all of it is, you're not going to be able to see it because you don't believe his report. We tend to believe, we'll believe what the government tells us. We'll believe what educational institutions tells us. We'll believe, as I get more knowledge and educate myself, as I'm reading and studying, educating myself, but we'll believe more of what the pontificate says than what the spirit of revelation tells us. And some people just don't have the spirit of revelation. A lot of things are given to us, and if he doesn't reveal it to us, then there's a lot of things that we're not going to know. It's very simple. Jesus said, we don't have to go there, but Jesus said in St. John 16 and 13, when the Spirit of truth come, what is he going to do? He's going to guide you into all truth. So then what is all truth? What is ALL? What is all truth? And that's the help that we have with the Spirit of truth. That Spirit of truth, it guides us into all truth. And as he does that guidance into all truth, that Jesus went on to say that the Spirit of truth will show you things to come. That's the agent of the Spirit of truth. That's what the Spirit of truth does. It'll show you things to come. The Spirit of truth will warn you against certain things, some things that are happening in our life, in our world. The Spirit of truth will warn you against that because he's trying to guide you into all truth. But what I want to talk about tonight, I want to talk about, as it says here, who's believed the report, and the arm is revealed to who. And there is a process in this book that should, that we know, some of us know, but maybe we'll introduce some things to some people on tonight. But it's going to come down to what do you believe? Do you really believe it? Or have we already been persuaded in our minds and in our hearts? We've already been persuaded, and you know, that there is no there's a danger in not growing. There's a danger in not growing. What do you mean? There's a danger in not growing? When Jesus in his last journey into Jerusalem, and he's seen a little uh, um, tree that had sprouted up, that had some leaves on it but didn't have any fruit, and or didn't even have the seed under the leaf to grow any fruit or anything like that. It wasn't full born or of full age, but he looked at that tree and then he cursed it. And the next day the disciples went by. What did they see? The tree had withered off of his word, because he could speak life and death. The life and death is in the power of his tongue. And so he spoke to it, and the next day they went by, the tree had withered and died, because it had not bear any or borne any fruit. And so there has to be some growth in us. There has to be growth in us. And if there's not growth, then you're in danger of being stagnant and fainting and then dying. If there's no growth, you're going to eventually die. We should not be we shouldn't be scared of growing. That should not, I want to know more. Teach me more. Let's talk. We used to sing that song, more, more, more about Jesus. We sing that all the time. But all of us in our journey, in our walk with him, we should want to know more. I've got to gain in my knowledge base, in my understanding, in my wisdom. I want to gain. I have to grow. It's a shame if I'm the same person when it comes to what I know of his spirit and his book and his word. If I'm the same person today that I was 10 years ago, something's wrong. There's no growth there. And it's sure enough a shame if the only thing I know today is what I knew back in the 70s. That's a shame. I mean, that's a shame. You haven't grown since the 70s? When he says knowledge is going to increase? There's things that we know today, that we're teaching today, that our former teachers and our teachers that have gone and passed on would listen to and sit in some of these Bible classes and hear this and go, my goodness, let's talk about that again. Let me hear that again. Let me rewind it. I mean, because knowledge increases. It's supposed to. I'm supposed to increase. And if I'm not increasing, then there's something wrong, and he could curse you. If you haven't grown since the 70s, you might be cursed. I know enough. That's all I need to know. Well, there's more to it than what we learned 50 years ago. There's more to it today. So I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the process of how our Father communicates, how he communicates. And at the beginning, when he created everything, we can go back to Genesis, and I'll probably pull some scriptures out of Genesis. But when he began, or when he created with his word or with his voice. It tells us in Hebrews, he spoke the world into existence. So he just spoke. It was a verbal message, just like I'm saying right now. It was verbal. And his verbal message that he spoke, things happened. He said, let there be light. And there was light. And so when he verbalized things, that was his message and his will. His message and his will was in what he verbalized. And that's how everything begun. When he created Adam, he We know how he he got some dirt off the ground and he fashioned a body. He actually created him and made him. And Adam was a full man with all organs, muscles, blood, everything. But then he had to breathe into his nostrils, and then we see Adam became a living soul. And then his relationship, the relationship that our father had with Adam, was a verbal relationship. He would talk. It said he walked with him in the cool of the evening, and after he had put in his day's work, because it wasn't instructed for Adam to work at night. You had 12 hours a day, and you got 12 hours of night, and they worked. He said you worked during the day. They didn't work at night, because he didn't work at night. When he did his creation, he spoke his creation into existence, and he made the heavens and the earth that we did it. He did it during the day, and then you had a balance of the day, which was night, and he didn't work at night. So he didn't want us to work at night. So Adam didn't work at night. Adam worked during the day. He was an agriculturalist, and he worked during the day. But at the cool, towards the end of his day, the cool of the day is when he would speak to Adam. And the relationship that he had with Adam was verbal. It was a verbal relationship. He spoke to him like I'm speaking to you. And all through, leading all the way up, and I want to go up to the sixth chapter of Genesis, and just an example in verse number 13. And Elohim said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And he goes on to tell him how to fashion the ark, how to build the ark. But his relationship with Noah was a verbal one. The word came to Noah through his voice. That's how he spoke to Noah. He spoke to him. That's a pretty intimate relationship. When you look at, he actually talked with him like I'm talking. Actually talking to him. Many of us are scared of our own shadow. So if we heard a voice coming from heaven, most of us would run and get into the house and shut and lock the doors and start crying. And, I heard a voice from heaven, because we're not used to that kind of relationship. But Noah didn't have a book that he was opening up to read. So his relationship with him was one of a verbal relationship. It was Noah heard his voice, and it was upon him. You knew if Noah was obedient or not if you seen what he did. You knew if Noah heard his voice if you seen what he did. So upon giving Noah the instruction on how to build the ark, how do we know that Noah was obedient to him? Because we see what he did, his actions, what he actually put his hands to do to build the ark. We knew that he had obeyed that voice because we see the fruits of his labor. We see what he actually did. The walk that Noah had with him was one of I'm speaking to you. If you have questions or if you don't understand something, you spark back to me, speak back to me, and then I'll answer them and speak back to you. You mean they had conversations like that? Of course they did. We can go up to, I want to go up to Abram. Let's go to Genesis 17. And verse, I'm going to start with verse number 1. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, Yah appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am Almighty Elohim. Walk before me and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. He's developing this relationship with him, even in the 15th chapter. I mean, we can go back to the 12th chapter of Genesis, because that's when the Most High calls Abram out of his family. He tells him to come on out of the land of Ur of the Chaldees, come out of thy father's house, come out away from those idolaters, and I'm going to promise you a son, and I'm going to make you a great nation through your son. So Abram's relationship with him was one of verbally, he talked to him, and Abraham would talk back to him. And so that's how they grew. That's how we knew Abraham, what was accounted to him for righteousness, is because when he heard that voice, when he heard the verbal interaction with him, when he heard it, he obeyed it. Simple obedience. I don't see, I'm not saying that it wasn't there, but I don't see too many times where Abraham was in doubt or an unbeliever. I don't see too many times. Now, I can see Abraham, he did question him. He said, you keep promising me a son. Why don't I have Eliezer to be that's going to inherit it? Why can't he be my son? He's my hired servant. Why can't he be my son? And the Most High had to reiterate to Abram, no, it's going to be a son through your seed, which means it's going to come through Sarah. So there was a time where Abram might have had, I know he believed the promises, but nothing's happening between me and Sarah, so maybe it's going to come through Eliezer, my hired servant. And he had to reiterate again to him that, no, it's coming through your seed, through Sarah, because I promised this and I'm not going to go back. So we see the verbal word, or verbally, we see the Most High in his manifestation was his verbal word. When he would verbalize his commands, that was his manifestation through his voice. Let's go to Genesis 26 and verse number 5. Because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Abraham did not write. So what was given unto him, what was given unto Abraham or Abraham, was the verbiage that our Father was telling them. This is what the charge that he gave him. What's an example of a charge that he gave him? Well, when he told him to come up out of your father's house, out of the land of the Ur of the Chaldees, that was a charge that was given unto him. It wasn't written. It was a charge that gave him. He heard his voice, and that gave him a charge, and so he did it. A commandment. What it was, the commandments that he gave him. We can see the commandments that he gave him. We can see that through his children, how he raised Isaac and taught Isaac how to raise Jacob, because actually this in the 26th chapter here, he's actually speaking to, you know who he's speaking to here in this chapter? Anybody know? who he's speaking to? Isaac. Yes, he's speaking to Abraham's son. He's actually speaking to Abraham's son. So when it says he kept my commandments, there was things that the Most High gave unto Abraham that he had given unto Isaac. Those were commandments that he had handed down to Isaac, and then Isaac would hand them down to Jacob. There was commandments that was given unto Abraham. It wasn't written in a book. It wasn't written in a book like how we have it, but yet he had been given some commandments. He said, my statutes and my laws. The statutes were the type of lifestyle that I want you to live. This is a statute. This is like a teaching, an ordinance on how to live your life. This is how I want you to raise your children. This is how I want you to treat Sarah, your wife. Did not give you an example of a statute. When Isaac was born, and you had Ishmael, who was about a teenager, and Ishmael was making fun of Isaac, and then what happened? Sarah said, Hagar, Ishmael, get out of the house. You got to go, because you ain't gonna have no inheritance with my son. You know, you're gonna mock my son, and nope, you got to go. Abraham did not want Hagar and Ishmael to leave. But what did our father tell him? What did our father tell Abraham? Listen to your wife, Sarah. Listen to your wife, Sarah. He said, because Ishmael's your seed, he's going to be blessed, but you listen to your wife, Sarah. Now, I can imagine some men today that would be so hard-footed and so browbeating that, woman, you're going to do what I say, and if you don't, I'm beating you down, and you're going to see my wrath and my anger, and you're going to see the bottom of my boot. You have some men that are like that. They don't want to hear anything that their wife has to say. They don't want to hear anything. They're just so rigid and so unforgiving and so harsh. But Abraham, when Sarah did that, so Abraham had to understand some statutes when it came to family, when it came to his relationship with his wife, when it came to the blessings, when it came to rearing up a house, when it came to a statute on how to serve him and worship him. If you're a wife beater, you're not worshiping him. That's not worshiping. That's not following a statute of the Most High. If you got your fists and you beating your wife, you ain't following no statutes of the Most High. Not at all. So even though Abraham did not have a book like we have to open up and read it, Abraham knew the statutes. He knew the statute. And we even see it. Another statute that he kept, you can call it a statute or you can call it a law. Not really a commandment, but a statute or law. Let me give you an illustration of that. Let's go to Genesis and the 14th chapter. This is Genesis, the 14th chapter, and I want to go down to verse number, let's go down to verse 17. Yes. Because of the relationship that he had with them, he gave him his verbal word. It was, he verbalized it to Abraham. Abraham heard his voice. He talked with him. In fact, it said Abraham was a friend of Elohim, or the Most High. He was a friend. He was his friend. So they communicated. They had there's a number of examples. Another example is in the 18th chapter of Genesis, when Lot had gone down into the plains and then into the city of Sodom. And it was the Most High, a manifestation of the Most High, and two angels that came down. It was three of them came down. And what did Abraham do when he first seen him? First thing he wanted to do was kill the fatted calf. Very first thing. Let's go kill the fatted calf. I'm gonna make you something to eat and everything. He says, go ahead and do it. We'll wait on you. And then he started pleading with him because he told him, he said, should I hide it from Abraham what I'm going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah? He said, no, I'm not going to hide it. Let me tell you, I'm going to destroy Sodom. And so Abraham gets in a conversation with them and starts saying, will you spare it for 50 people? You know, and he starts breaking it all the way down. The point I'm trying to make is that kind of relationship he had with him, to where he would speak to him, they would speak back. He didn't have a book and open it up and read it like we read it. Because when I get down to the end of this lesson, there ain't no excuse for us. I mean, absolutely none whatsoever. But here in Genesis 14, it could be considered a statute or a law. Listen to what happens. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him at the valley of Shaveh, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High Elohim. Is that what it says? And he blessed him and said, bless Abram of the Most High Elohim, possessor of heaven and earth. Now, who was a possessor of heaven and earth? It was the Most High, not Abram, but it was the Most High. But he's saying that Abram was going to be blessed of the Most High, who's possessor of heaven and earth. And he blessed be the Most High Elohim, which have delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And what did he do? And he gave him tithes of all. Now, don't get this mixed up, because Abram, who was nomadic, wasn't out in the fields planting seed and getting a harvest, because a lot of people think that tithes is what you get off the field. Well, what if you didn't have no field? Abram was nomadic. He wasn't the agriculture. When you look at what he had, Abram had a lot of livestock, and his livestock grew. He had gold, he had silver. Even when he went to the battle with these kings, he spoiled them by taking all their jewels, their gold, their servants, and that's how he spoiled them. And that's how he got enlarged. It wasn't that he had fields out there and he was planting lettuce and spinach and carrots and everything, and tomatoes, and because people misunderstand this book, they don't have a complete understanding. Because when it says Abram paid tithes of all, everything that Abram had, gold, silver, livestock, whatever he got from those kings and everything, he gave Melchizedek a tenth of all of that. There was no book written. Moses hadn't gone up to Sinai yet. So everybody that seems to think that tithing is strictly under the law and it's you tithe off the land, everybody who believes that doesn't have a full understanding of the book. Because Abram, who obeyed his commandments, statutes, and laws. And I think this is either a statute or a law that Abraham had obeyed, that was well before Mount Sinai. So it was something that was spoken to him that he understood and knew. Do you know, I'm just going to drop this in here real quick because I want to move on. But he had to teach this to his sons, because when Jacob was on the run from Esau, his brother, and he told the Most High, if you bless me, as he was going out to his, he was running scared, but he was going out to, Isaac's, that side of the family's house. And he says, if you bless me, when I come back here, you know what Jacob said? I'm going to give you a tithe of all that I have. Now, how would Jacob know that? I mean, it's in your book. We don't have to go there tonight, but you keep reading. It's in your book. How would Jacob know that unless it was something that was passed down from generation to generation? These are things that are generationally taught. We think we have to go to church or to a religion and to get taught that. You have some people who are in church at one time and they're faithful and tithe, then they backslide, they go out of church. You don't pay tithes. I'm not saved. Tithing for saved folks. No, this was their lifestyle. This is what I do. This is what I do. We're so short in knowledge. I mean, we're short in knowledge. That's why he says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. This was a principle and a statute that he had set up all the way back with Abraham, so that when he had all of that and he seen the priest of the Most High, oh my goodness, this is the priest of the Most High. Yeah, he knew exactly what to do. I'm giving him a tenth of everything. Somebody had to teach Abraham that. And he had that relationship with him. And tithing ain't just what you grow in the field. Like some people will tell you, tithing is only what you grow off, is what the earth yield. No, it's not, because what about Abraham here? He was nomadic. He wasn't out there in the fields. He didn't have no ox plowing out the field or anything like that. So it's just having an understanding of this. So it said, let's go back to Genesis 26. Where is that? 26 and 5. Did you have your hand up? Yeah. Okay. I thought I seen you with your hand up. He kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my law. So Abraham was obedient. And it is a statute for us or a law for us. And I'm not talking about Mount Sinai, but it is a statute or a precept for us to give a tenth unto the Most High. I don't care who you are. That's just something that he has established. When you go to the priest of the Most High, when Abraham seen, and he knew this was a priest of the Most High, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. It's automatic. But you got people today, help us. I ain't in church. Why should I do that? I ain't saved. Because it's our lifestyle. When you know that you're going before a mediator or a priest of the Most High Yah, and you're in his company or whatever, it is a statute to give unto him. Now notice what Melchizedek said. He said the Most High was possessor of heaven and earth. That's what he said. Most High is possessor of heaven and earth. Did that stop Abraham? Did that stop him? Oh, I don't have to give you nothing because the Most High, you just got to tell me he possesses the heaven and earth. Why should I give you anything? Was that Abraham's attitude? Oh no, he knew what to do. And you'll see that as he was faithful in that, what did the Most High do to Abraham? Blessed him. Blessed him and increased him. I can give him a lot because I know he's going to be faithful. I can just keep adding to him and keep adding to him because I know he's going to be faithful. Then you got some that he gives just to see, okay, what are they going to do? Oh, I want it all. I ain't giving nothing. God owns everything. Well, yeah, he does own everything. You can't stop him. He created everything. He said, the earth is mine, the fullness thereof. He said, the gold, the silver. He said, a cattle on 1,000 hills. Oh, that's mine. But our faithfulness unto him, if we want to be obedient, keep his commandments, his charges, statutes, and laws in the presence of the Most High, the priest of the Most High, or a go-between, because a priest is simply a go-between. He's a mediator, go-between. It was an honor for Abraham to give him everything that the Most High increased him by. Abraham could have said, well, the Most High owns all the heaven and the earth. You're a king and a priest. You got a whole kingdom. You're also a priest. Looks like you're doing pretty good. I see, looks like you're doing pretty good. I think I'm good. Nice meeting you. Abraham didn't do that. Oh, no, he was honored. He was honored. Oh, my goodness. I'm going to give him everything I got. Whatever I got, I'm going to give him 1/10 of it. And then you'll see how the Most High just blessed him. How do I know he blessed him? Because at his death, he was able to give a blessing to Ishmael, to Isaac. Now, Isaac was the promised one. So Isaac got the promise as the firstborn from Abraham, which means it was going to go, the blessing was going to go through Isaac and through Jacob and through his seed after that. It didn't come through Ishmael. All the descendants of Ishmael, that's not the good olive tree. It comes through Isaac and then Jacob. But also, he had 12 sons that were called dukes of who? Keturah. And one of those dukes was Meridian, which Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite. And so you had Meridian, and then he had other sons and daughters, it says. And he was able to give unto them. So you know he had a lot, he had increased 1,000% by the time that he died. A lot of us will not increase because we're so tight, and we only have a little, and we want to hoard the little bit we got. So he says, okay, that's all you're going to get then. But if we were faithful unto him and know how to give unto him, he honors that. He'll increase it. He'll bless it. So you have the verbal word, the spoken word of the Most High. But then that spoken word, what did he do next with that spoken word? What did he do next with that spoken word? So let's go to, let's start in, let's start at Exodus. Let's look at Exodus 31. 31 and verse number 18. And he gave unto Moshe, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone. So he had spoken to Adam, to Noah, to Abraham. He even spoke to Moses. How did he speak to Moses? Out of what? A burning bush. He spoke to him. It was the verbal word that he heard. But now we're starting to see something else now. Now we're starting to see how that verbal word, what he spoke verbally, where did he put it? He put it on tablets. He put it on stones. He wrote it with his own finger. So now you have the writing. So if he doesn't speak to me verbally, what do I have? I have the written word. It's written. It is written. So we have the audible voice, but now I don't have the audible voice, or you're starting to see the audible voice faint as man continues to populate the earth and grow and everything. You're starting to see the audible voice fade away some. But what stands out now? The written word. It's the written word. So he gives it unto Moses. He writes it himself. He didn't leave it up to Moses. He didn't leave it up to Moses the first time. He wrote it himself. Going to Exodus chapter 34 and verse number 1. And Yah said unto Moshe, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. So even after the first tables of stone, the second tables of stone, he still did not allow Moses to write on those tables of stone. He wrote it himself. How important, how sacred, how magnificent, what we can use some very flowery adjectives and, to describe it, but how magnificent and glorious it was for him to write it on stone. I wonder if that carries any weight. I wonder if that means anything. What he wrote with his own, didn't trust Moses to write it, but he wrote it with his own finger. Should I weigh that as being something maybe I should read? I mean, is it something that I should maybe take to heart? Is it something that I should value? Is that something? What he didn't even tell Moses. He said, I'm going to write it myself first. I'm going to write it. How should I take that? Is it trivial? Should I just be trivial with it? Is my approach to what he wrote on stone, that it doesn't mean anything. That's not important. You know, it's just the Most High, possessor of heaven and the earth, creator of all things. That's all. That's all it is. That's for those people. That's not for me. It's for everybody else, not for me. It's learning. You know, you enter into a covenant with him. Actually, they did. They entered into a covenant with him. Now, some people value it, that it's very important to them. Other people, it's kind of like a sleight of hand. Oh, well, that happened so long ago. Do you know that those two tables of stone, two tablets, tables of stone, are still here today? Isn't that magnificent? That something that was written 3,500 years ago, he didn't write it on leaves or on bark, on tree bark or things like that could decay over time. He wrote it on a stone with his own finger so that it would not be replaced. Nobody could write over it. Don't have to worry about it fading. Don't have to worry about it getting so old, getting brittle. You don't have to worry about that. And those tables of stone are still here today. Still here today. And one day, I think one day we're going to see it. Those who make it in, we'll be able to see those tables of stone. So he wrote it. Now, is that the only thing that was written? Was that the only thing that was written? No. After he had wrote this, even if we go down into verse number 27, we look at verse number 27, and Yah said unto Moshe, write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words I have made a covenant with thee and with Israel. And he wrote in verse number 28, and he was there with Yah 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. So this was a covenant that was given unto Moshe or Israel on Mount Sinai. It was a covenant that was given unto them. Now, was that the only thing that was written? Just 10 commandments? Was that the only thing that was written? No. So I want to go to let's go to Deuteronomy 17, and let's look at verse 18. And this is a responsibility of the kings when he was telling them that you're going to get a king, and this is what the kings are supposed to do. He lists several things here that the kings are supposed to do. With verse number 18, and it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. So what was given unto the Levites? What was given unto the Levites? Well, you had the book of the law, which was on the outside of the Ark of the Covenant. And in the book of the law, you had all of the law for the priest, for the kings. You had a lot of society laws, how to live amongst one another. All of that was in the book of the law. And so the king was supposed to write a copy of it. He was supposed to write a copy of it. And the reasons why he was supposed to write a copy, look at verse number 19. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life. The responsibility of the king was to copy the book of the law. He was supposed to read it. How often? Just one time? All the days of his life. Every king, that was a responsibility of the king. So when you had a new king that ascended to the throne, they were supposed to be able to write the book of the law and read it. Read the book of the law, write it and read it all the days of their life, that he may learn to fear Yah, his Elohim, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them. Now, it's important that we hear that the king was supposed to copy, or he was supposed to what? Write. There's a significance in that. That if that principle is not established, we're not going to understand something that Paul wrote, that we're going to get to tonight, something that he wrote hundreds of years after this. If we don't understand what was written in the book of the law, who copied it, who wrote it, who read it, the responsibility given unto the priest and to the king. And they were to write it. Now, were they supposed to add anything to it or take anything away from it? No, because it says in Deuteronomy in the same book, if anybody adds to it or takes away from it, then all the curses and the plagues of this book is going to be upon them and upon that people. So they weren't supposed to add to it or take it away. They were supposed to copy it the way it was and read it. And it was supposed to go from generation to generation. So after you had the kings, and we seen Israel and how they started to decay as a nation. They started to decay. A lot of the kings were wicked. Do you know that a lot of the kings stopped doing this? One of the kings, who was a king at 8 years old, Josiah, right? When he had seen some things and heard, he gone, oh my goodness. He went all the way back. He went all the way back. He went back. I believe, it doesn't say there, but I believe he copied the book and read it and made Israel get back into the statutes and the practice of keeping the book. I believe that. Why? Because it's instructed that the kings were supposed to write a copy of it and read it. So Josiah must have, oh my goodness, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And they did it. We see Nehemiah in Nehemiah's day and in Ezra's day, and we've seen how far Israel had gotten away and how you know what Nehemiah did? He made them stand up on your feet, and they read it how long? All day. Read the law to them all day during one of their feasts. He just read it to them. And then when they heard it and they seen how far they got away from it, what did the people do? They started crying and mourning. They got broke because they heard what was expected of them and what their duty and their responsibility was. And so they seen how far away they got from them, so they began to cry and mourn. But then Nehemiah told them, he said, this is not a time of mourning, because during that feast that they were having, it was not a feast for mourning. It was that feast that they had, it was a time to rejoice. And that's why Nehemiah told them, the joy of Yah is your strength. In Nehemiah 8 and 10, if you go and read the whole context of that, there was mourning and everything. He says, no, it's not time. This is no time to mourn. This is a feast. This is a time of being, of rejoicing. And it's a joyous occasion. He said, because the joy of the Lord, or the joy of the Most High, is your strength. So the kings had to write it. They had to write it. Who else had to write it? Well, let's go to Jeremiah. Looks at Jeremiah chapter 30. Yeah. Yeah. So the king was supposed to be humble. Yeah. Whenever a person is elevated, there should be some humility. And the higher elevation you go, the more humble you should be. Because it's pride. He said, pride goeth before what? Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. That's what it says. So, the higher up you go, every time you get elevated, you get pride. You go up a little higher and you get pride. Oh, I'm just so proud. Some folks, they so proud off of a title. They just so puffed up. But pride cometh before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. So that's why he wants to keep us humble. And that's why he's telling the kings, because in that time, the king is the highest position in the land. And so the king sets laws. The king can have your head. All he got to do is tell his general, go get them. I want their head, and they go out and get the head. It was a king's decree. Kings had the last word. When you look at Esther, in the book of Esther, what was that? Anybody know Esther? Because the king had set out a decree that they were going to go. Somebody can help me, but there was a decree from the king that it was legal to go and kill all the Jews. And that was a decree. And so Esther went into the king and said, hey, you're going to kill all my people. I'm a Jew, you're going to kill all my people. So he sends out another decree. He couldn't turn that decree, he couldn't turn it away. So he sends out another decree that the Jews could defend themselves. So if somebody comes to your house to take your life, you can stand your ground. And so that went out to preserve the nation of Israel. Now, you know what that's celebrated as, right? Isn't that Purim or? Yeah, Purim. Yeah, right. Okay, so let's look at Jeremiah chapter 30. Look at Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse, let's look at 1 and 2. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yah, saying, thus speaketh Yah Elohim of Israel, saying, now what does he tell him to do? Write thee all the words that I have spoken unto thee in a book. So you have the written word of the Most High on tables of stone. You have the book of the law that was written by Moses, he was supposed to give unto the Levites and unto the children of Israel, that was written by Moses' hand in a book that was placed on the side of the ark. You have the kings who were copying that book that was given to the priests. Every king that came up had to copy it, had to read it, had to write it and read it so that he would never forget it. He's got the prophets now, and he's telling the prophets to write. I want you to write it in a book. So we have the verbal word that moves in time to the written word. So you have the verbal word that goes to the written word, that the nation of Israel was responsible to keep that going for that nation and for whoever was joined into that nation. Same law book, okay? He says, write the words that I have spoken unto thee in a book. Now, Jeremiah wasn't the only one. Let's go to Ezekiel 43 and 11. Ezekiel 43 and 11. And if they be ashamed of all that they have done, show them the form of the house and the fashion thereof, and the goings out thereof, and the comings in thereof, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms thereof. Does it sound like he's repeating himself? And all the laws thereof. The reason why it sounds like he's repeating, because he's trying to emphasize and make a point. Anytime he repeats himself, he's trying to make a point. You don't have to tell us, man, you told us 2 times, you told us 3 times, you told us 4 times. If it's important, you're going to hear it over and over and over again. He's going to speak more than once if it's important. And remember, he always has a witness. We always have to do things with a witness. No verse can stand on its own. You've got to have witnesses. Then he says, and write it in their sight, that they may keep the whole form thereof and all the ordinances thereof, and do them. This is the law of the house. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. So the law of the house, which is most holy, was supposed to be written and written in a book. Not just written in a book, but he says, I want them to know the fashion of it. I want them to know the form of the house. I want them to know how to come in the house. I want them to know how to go out the house. I want them to know the whole form of it. So he's going into detail. I'm going into some detail with this. I want you to know all of this. Order for life. I like that. Order for life. He has order for life. Not just for his day, but order for life. Write it in their sight. He says, this is what I want you to do. He said, this is the law of the house. This is it. So we have what was written now. Everything that he wanted, everything that started out verbally, now what was verbal was where? Huh? It was in a book. It was in a book. Everything that was verbal now was written. Everything verbal was written. So now let's go to John 1 and 1, and then I want to go down to verse 14. John 1 and 1. And it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. So in the beginning was his word. That word that was in the beginning, as we went back to Genesis, what was that word? It was the spoken word. He verbalized it. It tells us in Hebrews that he spoke the worlds into existence. That was his verbal word. So we had him verbalizing, where you actually heard an audible voice. He verbalized it. All his will, his statutes, his commandments. How do we know he verbalized it? Because it says, who heard his voice? Abraham, yeah, Adam. Adam did. Noah heard his voice. And who else heard his voice? Moses and David. But who else? Isaac. Who else? Jacob. We're missing somebody. Joseph. We said Joseph, Jacob, Isaac, Noah, Adam, Abraham. Who said Abraham? I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. You got to speak up. Abraham. Abraham heard his voice. That's why we know that what was verbalized became written. Because what Abraham heard, now what were some of the examples that I gave, or one good example that I gave of Abraham, and he heard his voice and kept his statutes, his law and command. What was the example that we gave? Come out of the Chaldeans, come out from his family. That he kept the charge there. But how do we know what was verbalized to him that later was written, but it was verbalized first? And how do we know it was a statute and the example that I gave? Huh? He followed it? But I gave an example. We read it. We kind of talked about it for a minute. Huh? Law? Who did Abraham meet? He met Melchizedek or Melchizedek. And he met Melchizedek, but he was a king. So What was that all about? Yeah, he gave them a tithe of all. But was that written anywhere? It was? No. Abraham's relationship with him was verbal. He had his verbal word. He talked to him. Remember, he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? What happened? Well, he came down in a manifestation and two of his angels. And did Abraham talk with him? He pleaded with him. He talked with him. He pleaded with him. That's the kind of relationship they had. He wasn't going to a book reading and then following that. He spoke to him like I'm speaking to you. They had that verbal relationship. So that verbal word, then that verbal word we see with Moses, that verbal word became what? Written. It became law. It was written. The verbal word was written. So first he spoke it. Second, he wrote it. What's the third thing that he did? Let's go. He spoke it. He wrote it. Himself he wrote it. But then he told Moses to write it. Who else wrote it? The kings wrote it. And who else? The prophets. They all wrote the word. So the word went from being a vocal or verbal word. It went from being a voice or spoken. Then it went to be written. So you had the spoken word. Then you had the written word. Now, let's go down to John. We read John 1:1. Let's go down to John 1:14. Now, that which was vocalized, that which was written, now what happened? That word became what? Flesh. That word became flesh. He spoke it first. He wrote it second. He says, now I'm going to make it flesh. He sent it to earth. He made it flesh. So when we look at Hebrew, I'm going to come back here, but look at Hebrews 13:8. So when you look at Hebrews 13:8, what does it say? Hebrews 13:8. The same yesterday, today, and forever. Because what was verbalized at the beginning when he spoke everything into existence, he spoke to Adam, he spoke to Noah, he spoke to Abraham, he spoke to Moses. But then what was verbalized, what did it do next? It became written. So now you had the verbal word, then the written word, so everything was written down now. After everything was written down, then the word became flesh. Let's go back to John 1:14. Then the word became flesh. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. So that which was verbalized from the beginning and written on stone and in books, now we can touch it. We can handle it. The word of life, that's what 1 John 1:1 says, we seen it. We handled the word of life because the word became flesh. So the word, everything that was written. So when we see Jesus Christ, we can hear the verbal word and we can read the written word. Then we can see the word become flesh. We can see his life. Is there any difference? Did the Most High change from going from speaking it to writing it, putting it in flesh? It's all the same. It's all the same. There's no difference. That's why when Philip asked him, show us the Father and that will suffice us. He says, if you see me, you've seen the Father. Because what the Father had spoke, what was commanded the children of Israel to write, all of that becomes flesh. And it dwelt among us. So when we see Christ, we see our Messiah, we see the anointing, we see the only begotten of the Father. He is in unity with the Father because the Father hasn't changed. What he spoke and what was written has come to fruition, or it became flesh. So you got the vocal word, you got the written word, and you got the word made flesh. But he's not done. He's not done. But before we move on to the next, when the Remember I told you a responsibility of the kings was to copy it and write it and everything. Can't add to it or take away, but they were supposed to copy and to write it. Paul understood Jewish antiquities. He understood. Paul was a student of the law book. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He knew all of that. So when you go to Romans chapter 10 and verse number 4, when you look at Romans chapter 10 and verse number 4, let's see if you can understand this. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth. What Christ represents, there's not going to be anything else written. You had people who wrote. It was a responsibility of the kings. He gave it to the prophets. They all wrote. But when Christ came, what happened? All of that ended. Yes. Yeah, so when the word became flesh, that was the end of anything that was going to be written. There's not going to be any more kings writing anything. There's not going to be any more prophets writing anything. There's no more writing after Christ. Christ was the end of it. That's why it was all made flesh. When he said the word was made flesh, there's no new word coming. There's no new, I'm going to write. I guess this is important, at least for me as I'm discovering and learning. This is really important because somebody came on the scene which predated Christ. Now, what did Christ say about everybody who came before him? Anybody remember what Christ said? All that came before me are thieves and robbers. All that came before me are thieves and robbers. I guess understanding history, there had already been religions and idols and man gods and things like that that people and nations would follow. You've heard me say this, and I'm going to say it probably more in the teaching and everything, is there's a pontifice, which is a collegium or a college of priests that came into existence in 254, 252 BCE, or before Common Era. What's the significance of that? We might not see all of it today, but as you keep hearing the teaching and going on with the teaching, you'll see why that needs to be made mention. And especially in the light of this, where it says, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth. We don't need no pontifice, nobody else coming in, writing, saying, we're going to do it this way now. We're going to do that. In your study sometime, look up pontificate, what that was, and then the Pontifex Maximus, and the power that they gave the Pontifex Maximus, the power that school of priests, what they had. Do you know they could write religious law? They could write religious law. They could come in with their pen, with the stroke of the pen, and call, this is the way we're going to do it now. I know what it says in this book, but this is what we're saying. And so they could rewrite things, and they did. They wrote a lot of things, and you would be surprised as the more we talk about it and bring it out in the subsequent classes. You'll be surprised what we do, what the Christian church does, that comes from the Pontifex and not from this book. That's why it's important to understand that Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. Don't get this wrong. Some people read that and they think, see there, the law is done away with. That's not what Paul's saying. You have to get it. That's not what Paul's saying. First off, whenever you read Paul's writings, you have to understand Paul was not lawless. He was not anti-law. Paul was not. So when I read through his writings, I have to look at it through the lens of somebody who understood the law of Moses, the responsibility of kings, priests, prophets, somebody who had he was very steeped into the knowledge of the writings of Moses, very steeped into it. He was very rich in it. So he wasn't against it. He was not anti-law. He was trying to bring out some understanding of what the law was saying. So here he's saying, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth. He had the spoken word. He had the written word. Now the word was made flesh. That's it. That's it. For everybody who believes and believes in righteousness, Christ is the end. I don't have to look at nobody else. If I want to see the model of righteousness, I look at Christ. You can't add to it, can't subtract from it. You ain't supposed to add. He says, you don't add to my word, and you don't take away from it. So when I want to see the end of everything, when I want to see the fullness of righteousness, I see it in Christ. I see the fullness of the righteousness in Christ. That's where the end is. I don't have to look nowhere else. Everybody that's looking somewhere else besides Jesus Christ, they're adding to this. And that's what you got to be careful of. Because that is the spirit of the pontifice. They say that they can write religious law, and what they write and what they determine is right and wrong is the law of the church. But for us, many of us don't know. It's not like we have all this. We don't know. There's a lot of things that we just do because it's the form or the fashion of the church. But is that form and fashion of the church, do we see it in Christ? Because Christ ends it. He's the end of it. Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. Look at it as, okay, there's no more laws being written because Christ is the end of it. So I can look at Christ and I can see the beginning, the middle, the end. I can see all of it in Christ. I don't have to look anywhere else. You had the spoken word, you have the written word, and then you had the word that became flesh. But the Most High said he was going to do a new thing. So let's listen to how Paul describes this new thing. Let's listen to how Paul describes it. Because what Paul says here, he actually got this from Moses before Moses died. That's where Paul gets this. For Moses describeth righteousness which is of the law, that the man which doeth those things shall live by them. But the righteousness which is of faith speaketh on this wise. Notice now, there's not a change going on. If we are going to say, well, let me show you where the change is. If you want to say there's a change, let's see. Well, I'm going to see if you can pick it up. We're just going to read some scriptures and let's see if you can pick it up. But the righteousness which is of faith speaketh on this wise. This is verse number 6. Say not in thy heart, who shall ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down. Notice now, why would they want Christ to come down? Christ is our model. Christ is our paradigm. Christ is like we read in Hebrews, the first, or he's, what does it say? Yesterday, today, and forever. That's what Christ is. So don't say in your heart, who's going to bring him down from heaven, or who shall descend into the deep, that is to bring up Christ again from the dead. But what saith it? What saith it? listen, the word is nigh thee, in thy mouth, and where? In thy heart. That is the word of faith which we preach. So now, that which is in Christ, because Christ was the end of it, there's nothing new coming. Christ is it. All righteousness is fulfilled in Christ. But now he's saying, where does that have to be? Yes, yeah. It has to be in the heart. Like he says here, in thy mouth and in thy heart. What did Paul understand about all his learning at the feet of Gamaliel? What had Paul learned? Well, let's go to Jeremiah chapter 31. And let's look at verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith Yah, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith Yah. But verse number 33, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith Yah, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. And so what Paul was saying, now that word has become flesh, and I know Christ is the end of it, ain't nothing else coming. That's the end of righteousness. It's all right there in Christ. That which became flesh, now where does that have to be? In our hearts. He says he's going to put it in our inward parts. That means it's in our mouth. He says, you ain't going to send up to heaven to bring Christ down, go down to the deep to bring Christ up, but it's going to be where? In thy mouth. It's going to be in the inward parts. He says, and I'm going to write it in their hearts. So everything that was spoken, that eventually was written, and then came flesh, and we know that's it, ain't nothing else coming. Now, where does he want that? In our inward parts and in our heart. It has to be written in our hearts. That new covenant, that new thing that he said he was going to do, if it's not in your heart, then you don't have it. He hasn't written it in your heart. If it's not something you love, you don't love his statutes, his commandments, his law, you don't love that, then it's not written in your heart. The only way it could be written in your heart is if you love it. And it's in your inward parts. It's in your mouth that you speak it. This is something that he went from the Most High verbalizing it to writing it to where it became flesh. And so what does he do now? That word which was vocal, the word which was written, the word which became flesh, now that word must be spiritual. The word has to transition to being spiritual and being in my mouth and in my heart. Because when he writes it, when he puts it in the inward parts and he writes it on my heart, now that word, that has become spirit. The word that was vocal, the word that was written, the word that was made flesh, now the word has to be spiritual. It goes into all of us. That's the new thing he's doing. I'm putting it on the inward parts and I'm writing it in their hearts. Now that's the prophet Jeremiah, but let's go to Hebrews chapter 8. And let's look at verse number 10. So we see that in the prophet Jeremiah, but now we see it in Hebrews. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Yah. I will put my laws into their mind. Notice now, he's putting it in the inward parts. So we see the inward parts as being the mind, being the mouth, That's the inward parts. And then he says what? And write them in their hearts. So we see Jeremiah talking about the inward parts. We see Paul talking about the mouth. And we see Hebrews here talking about the mind. So the inward parts being the mouth and the mind. But out of all three of those witnesses, which one is constant? The heart. Thank you. Out of all three of them, Romans 10, Jeremiah 31, Hebrews chapter 8. Out of all three of them, it must be written in the heart. If it's not written in the heart, he has not spiritualized his word in you. It's got to be in your inward parts, in your mouth, it's in my mind, and it's got to be in my heart. It has to be something that I love. If you don't love his word, you don't love Christ. If you don't love his commandments and statutes, you don't love Christ, because Christ is the end of it. That's the end. If we want to, what does he say in Ecclesiastes 13 and 12? Anybody know what that says just off the top of your head? Is it Ecclesiastes 13, 12, or is it 12 and 13? Yes, Ecclesiastes 12 and 13. Ecclesiastes 12 and 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear Elohim and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That's it. That's it. Look at verse number 14. For Elohim shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. There's no way you can roll that up and throw it away and say that's Old Testament. There ain't no way, because he's talking about the day of judgment. He's talking about the day of judgment, which is yet to come for mankind, for Adam. The day of judgment is still got to come for Adam. So it has to be written in the heart. It has to be in my mind. It has to be in the inward parts. It has to be something that's in my mouth that I speak. It has to become spirit. That word has to become, that's the next big thing, is when this whole word becomes spiritual, when it becomes the spirit of man. When it becomes spirit. Because what does he say? If it's the spirit of man, let's go back to, I'm going to finish up here. If there are any questions, go ahead and present your questions if you have them. But in Hebrews 8:11, if it's in the spirit, notice what he says, and they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know Yah, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. All are going to know him, from the least to the greatest. When that word becomes spirit, when that word becomes spirit in me, when that word is in my inward parts, when that's in my heart, then I don't have to worry about being taught. You're not going to be able to teach me to love him. Not when it's written, not when it's in my heart. Nobody can teach me to love him. Why? Because the word is already in my heart. He's written it on my heart. I already love him. I already love him. How can you teach somebody to love him? That's the problem. We're trying to teach folks to love the Most High. We're trying to teach folks to love Christ. We're trying to teach folks how to love him. But if he writes it in your heart, you already love him. When he writes it in your heart, nothing can separate you from him. And that's why Paul goes through that litany of things when he says, who's going to separate you from the love of Christ? Didn't he say that? Who's going to separate you from the love of Christ? And then he goes on and starts to list all these things that can separate people. If it's written in your heart, you ain't going to let strife, envy, jealousy, pestilence, diseases. You're not going to let none of that separate you from the love of Christ if it's in your heart. If it's in my heart, ain't nothing. I can lose family. They used to sing that song. I can lose family. I can lose friends. I can lose houses. I can lose land. But what? Can't lose my soul. Can't lose my soul. So when it's written in your heart, I ain't going to let nothing separate me from him. My whole life can fall apart. That ain't going to separate me from him. Why? Because he wrote it in my heart. It's in my heart. I got it in my heart now. And once it gets into your heart, it's bigger than life. And there's nothing in life that can separate you. The promise that he gave us is that if we're in his Father's hand, what did he say? Can't nobody what? Pluck you out of his Father's hand. So the devil can't do it. Mom and daddy can't do it. Sister and brother can't do it. Son and daughter can't do it. Man on the job, boss man on the job, the banker, the teller. Can't nobody separate me. If I got the love of Christ, if it's written in my heart, can't nobody separate. Any questions or comments out there about the lesson as far as the word being vocal, the word being written, word becoming flesh, the word being in our heart? It has to be written in our heart. Any questions out there about that? Because there's some, when we talk about Romans 10 and 4, about what Paul was saying about the end of Christ, that to what Paul was dealing with there, that's very important to understand that when somebody tries to come in and rewrite things. That's really important. Because the person that I should see is Christ. Who's your example? Jesus Christ. And if I put him on, I'm going to walk like he walked. And where he leads, that's where I go. He's already given us the type of life that he lived. And he told his disciples, y'all follow me. And then Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. So we got to have our eyes on Christ. I got to have my eyes on Christ. And as Christ lived his life, he gave us an example on how we should live ours. That's what Peter said. Yes. Huh? No, you can't take his place. No, he was sinless. Can you say you sinless? No, he was sinless. He was sinless. And that was the only sacrifice that our Father would accept. He's not going to accept somebody that had sin and transgression. That disqualifies you. But he made him sin. Not that he committed sin, but he was made sin for us. So we don't have to be judged as a sinner. We still have to give an account for what we do, but we don't have to be judged as a sinner because he took those sins on for us. Not unless you continue in them. Now, if you continue in them, then you're going to be judged as a sinner. He said the soul that sinneth, it's going to what? It's going to die. That soul that sinneth, it's going to die. So he was the perfect sacrifice, and he taught us how to live our life. So all I got to do is follow Christ and be careful. We have to be so careful. Well, it's kind of too late. It's kind of too late for most people. There's just a remnant that's going to make it. There's just going to be a remnant that's going to make it in. So don't be thinking about no mass exit. I'm going to be all these folks, 1 million, some, but only a few going to find it. Only a few going to find it. But since Adam to today, he's got people from every nation, kindred, tongue. From Adam to today, he's got a people that's going to represent him. He has a people that was going to. I mean, Enoch was before. He was after Noah, wasn't he? No, Enoch was before Noah. Enoch was before Noah. And you had other righteous seed that predated Moses. And so you got people that made it in from even before Enoch, and from Enoch to Noah, Noah to Abraham, Abraham to Jacob, to Abraham to Moses, and then Moses to Christ, and then from Christ to today. So you got people all through this time. That's why he says when John looked up there, he go, oh my goodness, I seen all those people. Because when you talk about from the time he made Adam, Abel, Abel's in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. He said, righteous Abel. So, Abel made it. And going on through that time, he talks about Enoch in Hebrews 11. So when John looked up there, he's seen a people, oh my goodness, all these different people from different languages, from different nations, he's just seen all these people. But we think that all those people John looking at is our present generation. I don't think so. Because Christ says, if I don't shorten those days, the elect's not going to make it. He also said that wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many go in there. But he said, straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leadeth to life everlasting, and a few find it. A few. And then Paul talks about the remnant in Romans 11. There's just a remnant. So it's going to be hard to make it in this day. You got a lot of people that they're already convinced. There's things you're not gonna shake them. They're not willing to learn anything. You got some people still, they're living under the umbrella of, there's been no increase of knowledge since the 60s, since 1906, the 40s, 1960s, 1970s. They're still when he says knowledge is going to increase. So if you're not increasing in knowledge, then he wasn't speaking to you. But if you're increasing in knowledge and you're gaining in knowledge and wisdom, that's the ticket for today. Because my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. So we don't want to lack any knowledge. And that's why if you don't know something, you better ask. What's that saying out there? You better ask somebody. If you don't know something, you better ask somebody. Okay, so any questions, comments? Anybody got any questions, comments? This class has come to an end. Certainly thank you and welcome all those who were part of this class on tonight. Certainly glad you were able to join us. We'll be back on the Sabbath teaching again at 11 o'clock. And we welcome you all to that class as well. Pray for one another. We should be praying for our brothers and sisters, our family, especially in these times of uncertainty. We ought to certainly be praying for our teachers and our feeders, the shepherds and those who are watching over your soul. Certainly pray for them, and that we will all increase in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And with that, I say good night. Baruch haba Hashem Yahuwah. Grace and mercy.